Commander Vextal stood on the bridge of his warship and watched the strange object on his screen. The vessel was small and ugly, nothing like the beautiful ships of the Zephyrian Empire. Its hull was gray metal, with no smooth curves or glowing energy lines. It looked like someone had built it in a junkyard. "What is that thing?" asked his second officer, Zalamir, pointing at the screen with one of his 4 arms. Vextal touched the control panel with his long fingers. The ship's computer started scanning the unknown vessel. Information filled the screen in bright blue letters. The ship was from a planet called Earth. The beings inside called themselves humans. Humans, Vextal said the word slowly. He had never heard of them before. Run a check on our database. Salamir worked at his station for several minutes. His face showed confusion when he looked up. "Sir, there is almost nothing about these humans in our files. They only started traveling between stars a few months ago. Our scouts say they are a weak species that fights with primitive weapons." Vextal smiled, showing his sharp teeth. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. They had met hundreds of alien species, and all of them had bowed before Zephyrian power. These humans would be no different. "Open a communication channel," Vextal ordered. The main screen changed to show the bridge of the human ship. A male. Human sat in the captain's chair. He had short brown hair and wore a simple blue uniform. Behind him, other humans worked at control stations that looked rough and basic compared to Zephyrian technology. "I am Commander Vextal of the Imperial Cruiser Sovereign's Wrath," he announced in his most commanding voice. "You are in Zephyrian space without permission. Surrender your ship and prepare to be boarded." The human captain stood up slowly. His face showed no fear, which surprised Vextal. Most aliens were terrified when they first saw a Zephyrian warship. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison of the U.S. Liberty," the human said calmly. "We're on a peaceful exploration mission." "We didn't know this." Space belonged to anyone. Vextal's eyes glowed with anger. "Ignorance is no excuse. You will transfer all your star charts and survey data to us immediately. Then you will follow us to the nearest Imperial base for questioning." Captain Morrison shook his head. "I can't do that. This information belongs to Earth. If you want to talk, we can arrange a proper meeting between our governments." "You dare refuse a direct order from the Zephyrian Empire?" Vextal's voice rose to a roar. "We have conquered 1,000 worlds. Your pathetic species has barely left its home planet." "Maybe so," Morrison replied. "But we're not going to hand over our data to the first alien ship that threatens us." Vextal cut the communication and turned to his weapons officer. "Zortik, power up the plasma cannons. We'll disable their engines and take what we want by force." "Yes, Commander," Zortik replied, his claws dancing over the weapon controls. Plasma cannons charging. "Their shields are so weak, one shot should be enough." On the human ship, Captain Morrison turned to a woman with blonde hair at a nearby station. "Amy, are they powering weapons?" Lieutenant Amy Foster checked her instruments. "Yes, sir." "Energy readings are spiking across their ship. It looks like some kind of plasma weapon system." "Good thing we're not using energy shields then," Morrison said with a small smile. "Bring us about. Target their weapon arrays." "Sir, are you sure about this?" Amy asked. "Their ship is 3 times bigger than ours. Size doesn't always matter." "Lieutenant, fire when ready." Amy's fingers moved over her controls. The Liberty turned toward the Zephyrian ship like a small dog facing a large wolf. But this small dog had very sharp teeth. On the Sovereign's Wrath, Vextal watched the human ship turn toward them. "Look at that. They think they can fight us." Fire. Brilliant beams of blue plasma shot from the Zephyrian ship. The energy weapons lit up space like lightning. The beams struck the Liberty's hull, and bounced off. The plasma energy scattered harmlessly into space. What? Zortik stared at his controls in shock. Direct hit, but no damage. How is that possible? Vextal felt his confidence waver for the first time. Their shields must be stronger than we thought. Fire again. More plasma beams hit the human ship. Again, they did no damage. The Liberty's hull glowed briefly where the beams struck, but that was all. Sir, Amy called out from her station, I'm reading their plasma as a high-energy particle stream. Our ceramic armor is designed to handle that kind of heat. It's basically bouncing off us. Excellent, Morrison replied. Now let's show them what human weapons can do. Fire. The Liberty's main gun was not a beam of energy or a glowing missile. It was much simpler and much more dangerous. A solid piece of tungsten metal, no bigger than a telephone pole, shot from the ship at incredible speed. The tungsten rod hit the Sovereign's Wrath's forward weapon array. There was no bright explosion or flash of light. The rod simply punched through the alien ship's hull like a bullet through paper. The Zephyrian energy shields, designed to stop plasma and laser weapons, could not stop a solid object moving at such high speed. Alarms screamed across the Zephyrian bridge. Smoke poured from damaged control panels. Zordik looked at his instruments in horror. Forward plasma arrays destroyed. He reported, hull breach on decks 7 through 12. How did they do that? Vextal stared at the human ship. What kind of weapon was that? It appears to be a kinetic projectile, sir, Zalamir said, his voice shaking. A solid object fired at extremely high velocity. That's impossible. No civilized species uses such primitive weapons. The Liberty fired again. Another tungsten rod smashed through the Sovereign's Wrath's hull, this time hitting the engine section. The Zephyrian ship shuddered and began to drift. Engines offline. Zalamir shouted over the alarms. We're dead in space. Morrison's voice came over the communication system. Zephyrian vessel, this is Captain Morrison. Your weapons are destroyed and your engines are damaged. Do you want us to target your life support next? Vextal looked around his ruined bridge. His beautiful advanced ship had been crippled by a smaller vessel, using weapons that seemed impossibly simple. It made no sense. Energy weapons were supposed to be superior to kinetic weapons. Every species in the galaxy knew that. This is not overhuman, Vextal said into the communicator. The Empire will hear of this. I hope they do, Morrison replied. Maybe next time they'll be more polite. The Liberty turned away from the crippled Zephyrian ship and jumped to faster-than-light speed. Vextal watched it disappear, his mind struggling to understand what had just happened. How could such primitive weapons defeat Zephyrian technology? How could a species that had barely reached the stars fight so effectively? And most importantly, if one small human ship could do this much damage, what would happen if the Empire faced their entire fleet? Vextal did not know the answers to these questions, but he was about to find out that humans had been perfecting the art of war for their entire history, and they were very, very good at it. Admiral Kate Sullivan sat in her office on Earth, reading Captain Morrison's report for the third time. The words on the screen were clear, but she still found them hard to believe. One human ship had defeated a larger alien warship using nothing but railgun fire. Ma'am. Her aide, Lieutenant Paul Davis, stood in the doorway. The emergency council meeting is ready to begin. Kate nodded and followed him to the conference room. Around the long table sat the most important military leaders on Earth. General Frank Coleman from the Army, Admiral Robert Hayes from the Navy, and Dr. Linda Walsh from the Weapons Research Division. Ladies and gentlemen, Kate began, we are no longer alone in the universe. And unfortunately, our new neighbors are not friendly. She activated the wall screen, showing Morrison's battle footage. The room watched in silence as tungsten rods tore through the alien ship's hull. The good news, Kate continued, is that our weapons work against their technology. The bad news is that this was just one ship. According to our analysis of their communications, the Zephyrian Empire controls hundreds of worlds. General Coleman leaned forward. How long do we have before they come back? Unknown, Kate replied. But we have to assume they will return in force. We need to prepare for war. Dr. Walsh cleared her throat. Admiral, our weapons were effective because their shields couldn't stop solid projectiles, but they might adapt their defenses. And we adapt faster, Kate said firmly. What do we have available for defense? Admiral Hayes pulled up another screen showing Earth's military assets. We have 37 ships capable of interstellar travel. Most are exploration vessels like Morrison's, but we can retrofit them for combat. We also have the orbital defense platforms around Earth. 37 ships against an empire, General Coleman said grimly. Those aren't good odds. Kate stood up and walked to the window. Outside, she could see the lights of the city stretching to the horizon. Millions of people going about their daily lives, unaware that aliens might attack at any moment. We've faced worse odds before, she said. Remember, humans have been fighting wars for thousands of years. We know how to make the most of what we have. 2 days later, Bill Harper stood in the main assembly hall of Detroit's largest car factory. But instead of building vehicles, the production line was being converted to manufacture something very different. Listen up, everyone, Bill called out to the workers. I know this is strange, but we're not making cars anymore. We're making weapons to defend Earth. A worker named Tony raised his hand. What kind of weapons, Mr. Harper? Bill pointed to the blueprints on the wall. Railgun components. The same electromagnetic technology we use in maglev trains, but designed to fire metal projectiles at incredible speeds. Mary, one of the engineers, studied the plans. This is basically a giant magnetic cannon. Exactly, Bill nodded. And the beauty is, we already know how to build most of these parts. Electric motors, magnetic coils, power systems, we make this stuff every day. Within a week, factories across Earth had changed their production. Car plants built railgun barrels. Electronics companies made targeting computers. Steel mills produced special armor plating. The entire planet was becoming a weapon factory. Meanwhile, far across the galaxy, Admiral Colvin stood in his private chamber aboard the battleship Eternal Glory. He was reading Commander Vextal's report and laughing. Listen to this, Morden, he said to his aide. Vextal claims that primitive kinetic weapons destroyed his plasma arrays. He must have suffered brain damage in the fight. Morden, a younger Zephyrian with bright green skin, looked uncertain. Sir, the damage reports seem to support his story. The holes in his ship are consistent with high-velocity impacts. Impossible. Colvin waved a dismissive hand. No species uses kinetic weapons in space combat. They're too slow, too inaccurate, and too weak compared to energy weapons. Vextal must have had a system failure. What are your orders, Admiral? Colvin smiled. Cruelly, I'll take a small fleet to this Earth and show these humans what real military power looks like. 12 ships should be more than enough to conquer their entire planet. Only 12 ships, sir? Any more would be wasteful, Colvin replied. According to our intelligence, humans have barely developed spaceflight. They probably don't even have proper weapons. This will be good training for our newest recruits. Back on Earth, the preparation for war continued around the clock. Captain Sam Rodriguez supervised the retrofitting of the exploration ship Defiance in the orbital shipyard. Above Earth, workers swarmed over the vessel, installing new weapon systems and armor plating. "How is the main gun coming along?" Sam asked Chief Engineer Mike Torres. "Better than expected," Mike replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We've tripled the power output of the original railgun. The new one can fire a 50-pound tungsten rod at 15% of light speed." Sam whistled appreciatively. "That should punch through just about anything." "The targeting system is the real innovation," Mike continued. "Instead of trying to track fast-moving targets, we're using predictive algorithms. The computer calculates where the enemy ship will be and fires there. What about our defenses?" "That's the interesting part," Mike grinned. "We're not using energy shields at all. Instead, we've covered the hull with layers of ceramic armor and ablative plating. Energy weapons will just burn off the outer layer without reaching the important parts." Meanwhile, in a secret facility beneath the Rocky Mountains, Dr. Linda Walsh worked on humanity's secret weapon. She called it the kinetic storm system. "The idea is simple," she explained to her team. "Instead of one big gun, we use thousands of small ones. Each projectile is tiny, but when you fire a cloud of them at once, they're devastating." Her assistant, Dr. Rick Barnes, looked at the test results. "The penetration power is incredible. Even if their shields can stop some of the projectiles, enough will get through to cause major damage. And the best part," Linda added, "is that it uses technology we already understand. No exotic particles or strange energy fields. Just good old-fashioned physics." 3 weeks after Morrison's first encounter, Earth's defenses were as ready as they could be. The orbital defense platforms had been upgraded with massive railguns. Every ship in the fleet had been armed with kinetic weapons. Production facilities continued to churn out ammunition and spare parts. Admiral Sullivan stood on the bridge of the command ship Retribution, watching the edge of the solar system on her screens. Long-range sensors were scanning for any sign of alien ships. "Ma'am," called Lieutenant Amy Foster, who had been transferred from Morrison's ship, "we're picking up hyperspace signatures. Multiple contacts approaching from the outer system." "How many?" Kate asked. 12 ships, Admiral. They're big ones." Kate activated the fleet communication system. "All ships, this is Admiral Sullivan. The aliens are here. Remember your training. Trust your weapons, and show them what humans can do. Good hunting." Across the fleet, captains and crews prepared for battle. They checked their weapons, tested their systems, and said quiet prayers. Most of them had never been in a real space battle before, but they had something the aliens didn't expect. They were fighting for their home. Admiral Cole Fens. Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. He looked at his tactical display with satisfaction. Earth hung in space ahead of them, a small blue world that would soon bow before Zephyrian power. "Sir," his sensor officer reported, "we're detecting multiple ships around the planet. It appears they have some kind of defense force." "How many ships?" Colton asked. 37 vessels, Admiral. Most appear to be converted civilian craft." Colton laughed. 37 ships against 12 Zephyrian warships? This will be even easier than I thought. Signal the fleet to advance. We'll destroy their pathetic fleet first, then demand the planet's surrender. As the alien ships moved toward Earth, both sides prepared for a battle that would change the galaxy forever. The Zephyrians believed their superior technology and experience would ensure easy victory. The humans knew they were outgunned and outnumbered, but the humans had something else. The desperate courage of a species fighting for its survival, and weapons designed by minds that had spent millennia perfecting the art of war. Captain Zardock stood on the bridge of his warship and stared at the blue planet ahead. Earth looked peaceful and defenseless, just as the intelligence reports had said. This would be his first real battle, and he expected it to be over quickly. "Sir?" His tactical officer Creenol called out. The human ships are moving into formation around their planet. They appear to be preparing to fight. Zadok laughed, a sound like grinding metal. With those primitive vessels? Look at them, Krino. No energy signatures, no plasma weapons, no proper shields. They're probably armed with chemical rockets. Admiral Colthan's voice came over the communication system. All ships maintain formation. We'll demonstrate Zephyrian superiority with a coordinated plasma bombardment. Target their largest vessels first. On Earth's orbital defense station Alpha, Lieutenant Colonel Lisa Pierce watched the alien fleet approach. Her station was hidden on the dark side of a small asteroid, invisible to the enemy sensors. Around her, technicians prepared the massive electromagnetic cannons built into the rock. Distance? Lisa asked her targeting officer, Sergeant Joe Miller. 2 million kilometers in closing, Joe replied. They're moving in a tight formation, just like our simulations predicted. Perfect, Lisa smiled grimly. They think they're fighting primitives. Let's show them how wrong they are. Captain Sam Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching his tactical display. The human fleet was spread out in what looked like a random pattern around Earth, but every ship position had been carefully calculated. Amy, Sam said to his weapons officer, are the targeting computers synchronized? Lieutenant Amy Foster nodded. All ships are linked to the main battle network. When we fire, every shot will be coordinated. Excellent. And our special surprise? Amy grinned. The kinetic mines are in position. The aliens won't see them coming. The Zephyrian fleet continued its approach, confident and arrogant. Their ships were beautiful works of art, with flowing curves and glowing energy conduits. Plasma cannons charged with brilliant blue light. Force field generators hummed with power. Target acquisition complete, Kree now reported to Captain Zadok. All human vessels are locked. Fire! Colthan's voice boomed across the fleet. Space lit up like a festival of lights. Dozens of plasma beams shot from the Zephyrian ships, each one carrying enough energy to vaporize a city block. The beams were beautiful and terrible, painting the darkness with brilliant colors. The plasma struck the human ships ... and did almost nothing. What? Zadok stared at his screens in shock. Direct hits on multiple targets, but no damage readings. On the Defiance, Sam felt his ship shake slightly as plasma beams struck the hull. The outer layer of ceramic armor glowed white-hot for a moment, then cooled. The energy dispersed harmlessly into space. Hull temperature rising, but within acceptable limits, reported Chief Engineer Mike Torres. The ablative armor is working perfectly. Their energy weapons are useless against our defenses, Amy added with satisfaction. Just like we planned. Admiral Colthan's voice crackled with rage over the Zephyrian communication system. Impossible. Increase power. Fire again. The alien ships fired a second volley, this time at maximum power. The plasma beams were brighter and more intense than before. Again, they struck the human vessels. Again, they caused no significant damage. Sir, Kreenal said nervously, their hull composition appears to be designed specifically to resist energy. Weapons. The plasma is being absorbed and dispersed. That's impossible, Zadok snarled. No primitive species could develop such technology. Maybe they're not as primitive as we thought, Kreenal suggested quietly. Admiral Sullivan watched the battle from her command ship. The alien weapons were impressive, but useless against human defenses. Now it was time for the humans to show what their weapons could do. All ships, she announced over the fleet network, commence firing. Show them the power of human engineering. Captain Rodriguez looked at Amy. You heard the Admiral. Light them up. The human response was nothing like the Zephyrian attack. There were no bright beams of energy or glowing missiles. Instead, Invisible tungsten rods shot from the human ships at incredible speeds. The first salvo hit the Zephyrian formation like a meteor shower. Solid projectiles moving at 15% of light speed punched through energy shields as if they didn't exist. The beautiful alien ships suddenly had ugly holes torn through their hulls. Hull breach. Kreenel screamed as alarms filled the bridge. Forward sections compromised. How are they doing this? Zadok watched in horror as 3 ships in his formation exploded. The humans had fired simple metal rods, but the kinetic energy was devastating. It was like being attacked with invisible hammers moving at impossible speeds. Evasive maneuvers, he ordered. All ships scatter. But the human targeting computers had predicted this reaction. As the Zephyrian ships broke formation, they flew directly into the path of the kinetic mines that Captain Rodriguez had mentioned. The mines were simple devices, just chunks of metal with small thrusters. When the alien ships came close, the mines activated and rammed into them at high speed. The impacts tore massive holes in the Zephyrian hulls. "Sir," Kreenel's voice was panicked now, "we've lost 6 ships. The humans are using kinetic weapons." Throughout their formation, Lieutenant Colonel Pierce decided it was time for the orbital defense stations to join the fight. All platforms. Target the largest enemy vessel. Fire on my mark. Hidden in asteroids around the solar system, massive. Railguns powered up. Each cannon was the size of a skyscraper, built into solid rock to handle the enormous recoil forces. "Mark," Pierce commanded. 6 tungsten rods, each weighing 5 tons, shot toward Admiral Colfin's flagship. The rods were perfectly synchronized, designed to hit the same target within microseconds of each other. Colfin saw the incoming projectiles on his sensors just seconds before impact. Shields to maximum. Brace for... The first rod punched through his ship's energy shield and hull like a bullet through tissue paper. The second rod hit while the ship was still reeling from the first impact. The third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. Rods followed in rapid succession. The magnificent battleship Eternal Glory, pride of the Zephyrian fleet, was torn apart by simple chunks of metal moving very fast. The ship broke in half and exploded in a ball of gas and debris. Admiral Colfin is dead, someone screamed over the Zephyrian communication network. The flagship is destroyed. Captain Zardock stared at the wreckage where his commanding officer had been moments before. His own ship was badly damaged, with multiple hull breaches and failing systems. Half his fleet was dead or dying. "This is impossible," he whispered. "They're primitives. They can't have weapons this powerful." "Sir," Kreenel said urgently, "we need to retreat. We're being slaughtered." "No," Zadok's pride wouldn't let him admit defeat. "We are Zephyrians. We cannot be beaten by primitives. All ships, attack formation. We'll ram them if we have to." The remaining Zephyrian ships turned toward the human fleet, weapons blazing, but their plasma cannons were still useless against human armor. Meanwhile, the humans continued to fire tungsten rods with deadly accuracy. Captain Rodriguez watched the enemy ships charge toward his position. "They're either very brave or very stupid," he told Amy. "Both, I think," she replied. Targeting. The lead ship firing. Another tungsten rod shot from the Defiance's railgun. It struck the attacking Zephyrian vessel directly in the engine section. The ship lost power and began to drift, dead in space. The battle was becoming a massacre. Human. Weapons were perfectly designed to defeat Zephyrian defenses, while Zephyrian weapons couldn't even scratch human armor. It was like watching knights in full armor fight naked opponents armed with sticks. "Sir," Kreenel said desperately, "we have to retreat. We've lost 9 ships. Only 3 are still fighting." Zadok looked around his ruined bridge. Smoke poured from damaged systems. Half his crew was dead or injured. The humans had destroyed most of his fleet, using weapons that seemed impossibly primitive. "Retreat," he said quietly. "Sir? I said retreat." Zadok shouted. All remaining ships jumped to hyperspace immediately. The 3 surviving Zephyrian ships fled the battle, their crews shocked and terrified. They had come to conquer what they thought was a primitive world. Instead, they had been crushed by an enemy that used simple but devastating weapons. Admiral Sullivan watched the alien ships disappear into hyperspace. The first major battle between humans and the Zephyrian Empire was over. Earth had won a complete victory. "Casualties?" she asked her aide. "Minimal, ma'am," Lieutenant Davis reported. "A few ships have minor hull damage, but no fatalities." Kate nodded with satisfaction. The humans had proven that advanced technology wasn't always better than simple engineering. Sometimes the best weapon was the one that actually worked. But she knew this was just the beginning. The Zephyrian Empire wouldn't give up after one defeat. They would come back with more ships and better tactics. When they did, humanity would be ready for them. Admiral Colvin floated in the medical tank, his body slowly healing from the injuries he had suffered when his ship was destroyed. The blue healing fluid surrounded him, but it could not heal his wounded pride. He had been rescued from the wreckage, but his reputation was in ruins. High Admiral Mergath stood beside the tank, his ancient face showing both anger and confusion. "Explain to me again how you lost 9 ships to a species that has barely reached the stars." "Their weapons," Colvin said weakly through the fluid. "They use kinetic projectiles that ignore our shields completely. Our energy weapons are useless against their armor." "Kinetic weapons?" Mergath's voice was full of disbelief. "No civilized species has used such primitive technology for 1,000 years. I know how it sounds," Colvin replied. "But I saw it myself. They fire solid projectiles at incredible speeds. Our shields might as well not exist." Mergath turned away from the tank and looked out the window at the stars. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled the galaxy for 3 millennia. No species had ever defeated them in battle. Now a race of primitives had destroyed one of their fleets using ancient technology. "I want the 3rd Fleet mobilized," he said finally. 47 ships, including the dreadnought Imperial Destiny. We will crush these humans once and for all. "Sir?" Colvin said urgently. "You're underestimating them. Enough." Mergath's eyes blazed with fury. "I will not allow the reputation of the Empire to be damaged by your failures. The 3rd Fleet will succeed where you could not." 3 weeks later, the largest Zephyrian fleet in a century assembled at the edge of the Sol system. Admiral Colvin, now recovered from his injuries, commanded the fleet from the massive dreadnought Imperial Destiny. The ship was 2 kilometers long and bristled with the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. "Sir?" Captain Veltar reported from the sensor station. "Long-range scans show increased activity around the human homeworld. They appear to be expecting us." "Good," Colvin said grimly. "Let them see our fleet and despair. Signal all ships to advance in battle formation." But the humans had not been idle during the weeks since the last battle. Captain Ryan Bell, head of tactical development, had worked day and night to prepare new surprises for the enemy. "How many mines did we deploy?" asked Admiral Sullivan from her command center. "Over 10,000, Ryan replied with satisfaction. "They're spread throughout the outer solar system, completely invisible to energy-based sensors. Each one is programmed to attack the largest ship in its area." "And the new weapon systems?" "Ready for testing," Ryan grinned. "The aliens are about to learn that humans have been perfecting warfare for a very long time." The Zephyrian fleet moved into the solar system like a pack of predators. Their ships were magnificent, with glowing energy fields and weapons that could destroy cities. But as they advanced, they began to encounter the first of humanity's defenses. The kinetic mines were simple devices, just metal spheres with rocket engines and basic guidance systems. They were too small for the Zephyrian sensors to detect, and they gave off no energy signatures. To the aliens, they were invisible. "Sir," Veltar called out suddenly. "Collision alert. Multiple objects approaching from all directions." Colfin looked at his tactical display. Dozens of small contacts were racing toward his ships. "What are they? Missiles?" "Unknown, sir. They're not giving off any energy readings." The first wave of mines struck the Zephyrian formation. They were moving fast, and each one carried enough kinetic energy to punch holes in starship hulls. The aliens watched in horror as their beautiful vessels were damaged by what looked like flying chunks of metal. "Defensive fire!" Colfin ordered. "Destroy those projectiles." The Zephyrian ships opened fire with their plasma cannons. Bright beams of energy lit up space as they tried to shoot down the incoming mines. But the mines were small, fast, and hard to target. Many of them got through the defensive fire and slammed into the alien ships. "Hull breaches on 7 vessels," Veltar reported. "The objects appear to be kinetic impact weapons." "Impossible," Colfin muttered. "They're just chunks of metal." "Very fast chunks of metal, sir," Veltar replied nervously. As the fleet pushed deeper into the solar system, they encountered more and more mines. The attacks came from all directions, forcing the Zephyrians to constantly maneuver and fire their defensive weapons. Several ships were badly damaged, and one destroyer was completely destroyed when a mine hit its engine core. "Sir," Captain Veltar said urgently, "we're taking heavy losses from these automated weapons. Perhaps we should reconsider our approach." "Never." Colfin's pride wouldn't let him retreat again. "We have 47 ships. No primitive species can stand against the might of the Third Fleet." But the humans weren't finished yet. Colonel Nina Hayes sat in the command center of the experimental ship Hammerfall, watching the alien fleet approach. Her vessel was humanity's latest creation, a ship built around a single massive weapon. "Distance to target?" she asked her tactical officer, Lieutenant Mark Taylor. 500,000 kilometers and closing, Mark replied. "The main gun is charged and ready." "What about the special ammunition?" "Loaded and armed." This is going to be one hell of a shot. The Hammerfall's main weapon was the ultimate expression of human military philosophy. It was a spinal-mounted railgun that ran the entire length of the ship. The projectile it fired wasn't just a tungsten rod. It was a specially designed penetrator round with multiple stages. "All ships," Admiral Sullivan's voice came over the communication system. "The Hammerfall is authorized to fire. Clear the target zone." Nina smiled as she gave the order. "Fire." The Hammerfall's massive railgun discharged with a flash of electromagnetic energy. The projectile it fired was invisible to the naked eye, but it was moving at 20% of light speed, faster than any weapon ever built by humans. "Admiral," Colfin was studying his tactical display when his flagship suddenly shuddered. Alarms began screaming across the bridge. "What was that?" he demanded. Veltar stared at his instruments in shock. "Sir, something just punched a hole straight through our ship. It went in the front and came out the back." "That's impossible. Our armor is the strongest in the galaxy." "Sir," the damage control officer reported, "the projectile passed through 17 decks and exited through the rear hull. It also hit the ships behind us." Colfin looked at his formation display. The projectile hadn't just damaged his flagship. It had continued on to strike 2 more ships in the line. One shot had damaged 3 vessels. "How?" he whispered. Captain Joe Martinez, commanding the human battleship Retribution, watched the results of the Hammerfall's shot with satisfaction. Direct hit on the enemy flagship. The round appears to have maintained structural integrity through all 3 targets. "Incredible," his weapons officer replied. "A single shot took out 3 ships." That's human engineering for you, Joe said, proudly. When we build a weapon, we build it to work. The battle was turning into another disaster for the Zephyrians. Their energy weapons were still useless against human armor, while human kinetic weapons cut through Zephyrian shields like they weren't there. The aliens found themselves in the same impossible situation as before. They couldn't hurt their enemies, but their enemies were destroying them with ease. "Sir," Veltar said desperately, "we've lost 15 ships. The humans are using some kind of super weapon." Colthan stared at the tactical display. His magnificent fleet was being torn apart by an enemy that used weapons his people considered obsolete. It was humiliating and terrifying at the same time. "All ships, concentrate fire on their largest vessel," he ordered. "Maximum power to all weapons." The remaining Zephyrian ships focused their plasma cannons on the Retribution. Dozens of energy beams struck the human battleship, lighting up its hull like a star. The ceramic armor glowed white-hot under the bombardment. "Hull temperature rising," reported the Retribution's engineer, "but still within acceptable limits. The cooling systems are handling the load." Captain Martinez smiled. "Their best shot, and we're barely warmed up. Return fire." The Retribution's railguns spoke in reply. Tungsten rods shot toward the Zephyrian formation at incredible speeds. Each shot was perfectly aimed, guided by computers that could predict exactly where the enemy ships would be. 3 more Zephyrian vessels exploded under the barrage. Their hulls simply couldn't handle the kinetic energy of the impacts. "Retreat." Colthan finally admitted defeat. "All ships jump to hyperspace immediately." "Sir," Veltar said quietly, "only 18 ships are still capable of jumping." Colthan felt his world crumble around him. He had lost nearly 30 ships to an enemy that used primitive weapons. The Third Fleet, pride of the Zephyrian military, had been destroyed by humans who had barely learned to travel between stars. "Jump," he said weakly. The surviving Zephyrian ships fled the battlefield, leaving behind the wreckage of their comrades. The humans had won another complete victory, this time against the largest fleet the Empire had ever sent against them. "Admiral," Sullivan watched the alien ships disappear into hyperspace. "Casualty report," she asked. 2 ships with minor damage," her aide reported. "No fatalities." Kate nodded. The humans had faced a fleet 3 times larger than the first one and had destroyed it just as easily. But she knew the real test was yet to come. When word of this defeat reached T, High Counselor Tharin sat in his crystal throne and stared at the holographic display floating before him. The numbers didn't make sense. The Zephyrian Empire had lost nearly 40 ships to a species that had been in space for less than a year. "Explain this to me again," he said to the trembling admiral standing before him. Admiral Colthan's voice shook as he spoke. "High Counselor, the humans use kinetic weapons that our shields cannot stop. They fire solid projectiles at tremendous speeds. Our energy weapons are useless against their armor." "Kinetic weapons," Tharin repeated slowly. "You're telling me that we, the rulers of the galaxy, have been defeated by rocks thrown very fast?" "Not rocks, sir. Precision-engineered projectiles fired by electromagnetic accelerators. Their technology is specifically designed to counter our defenses." Tharin stood up from his throne and walked to the great window that looked out over the capital city. Below him, millions of Zephyrians went about their daily lives, unaware that their empires' dominance was being challenged. "How is this possible? We have ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. Our technology is the most advanced ever developed." "Perhaps," said a new voice, "that is exactly the problem." Tharin turned to see Chief Science Advisor Kuo Tao entering the chamber. The old scientist's skin was pale with age, but his eyes were sharp with intelligence. "Explain," Tharin commanded. "For 3 millennia, we have faced no real challenges," Cordell said. Every species we encountered was either primitive or had developed along the same technological paths we did. We created energy weapons and energy. Shields. When we met other races, they had energy weapons and energy shields too. We simply built bigger and better versions. And the humans developed differently. Their world was divided into competing nations that fought constant wars. They had to innovate or die. While we perfected plasma cannons, they perfected kinetic weapons. While we built energy shields, they built armor to resist energy attacks. Admiral Colfin nodded reluctantly. Their weapons seemed specifically designed to defeat our defenses, almost like they knew what we would bring to battle. Not knew, Quatal corrected. They simply prepared for every possibility. Their military doctrine assumes that any enemy might have energy weapons, so they built defenses accordingly. Tharin felt a chill run through his body. Are you saying that we are inferior? Not inferior, Quatal replied carefully. Different. We became specialists in one type of warfare. They remained generalists, ready for anything. Meanwhile, on Earth, Dr. Claire Watson was reaching similar conclusions about the Zephyrian Empire. She sat in her laboratory, studying captured alien technology and communication intercepts. Admiral Sullivan, she said into her communicator, I think I understand why we've been so successful against them. Kate's voice came back through the chew. Speaker, explain, Doctor. They've been the dominant power for so long that they've stopped innovating. Look at these weapon systems. The basic design hasn't changed in over 1,000 years. They've just made bigger versions of the same thing. While we've been fighting each other for centuries, Kate observed. Exactly. Every human war has driven new innovations. Better armor, better weapons, better tactics. We've never had the luxury of assuming our enemies would be weaker than us. Captain Alex Turner, who had been leading reconnaissance missions into Zephyrian space, added his own observations. Their ship formations are rigid and predictable. They fight like they're on parade, not like they're in a real battle. What's our next move? Kate asked. I think it's time for diplomacy, Claire replied. They're starting to realize they can't beat us militarily. Maybe we can end this without more bloodshed. 2 weeks later, a single human ship approached the neutral space station, where diplomatic meetings were held. Ambassador Grace Miller sat in the captain's chair, reviewing her notes for the upcoming negotiation. Remember, Admiral Sullivan had told her before departure, we're not here to gloat or humiliate them. We want peace, but we also want them to understand that Earth is not to be threatened. The space station was ancient and had been used for diplomatic meetings between various species for centuries. Grace's escort, Captain Ben Clark, docked their ship carefully at the station's human-sized airlock. Their delegation is already aboard. Ben reported. High Counselor Tharin himself is here. Grace was surprised. The supreme leader of their empire? This must be more serious than we thought. The meeting room was designed to accommodate different species. Grace sat at a table sized for humans, while Tharin towered over her from his much larger chair. The Zephyrian leader was impressive, nearly 3 meters tall with golden skin and piercing blue eyes. Ambassador Miller, Tharin began, I must ask you directly. How is it possible that your species has defeated our fleets so easily? Grace had expected this question. High Counselor, may I ask you something first? When was the last time your empire faced a real military challenge? Tharin thought for a moment. The Vorthan Rebellion, perhaps 800 years ago. But they were quickly crushed. 800 years of unchallenged dominance, Grace mused. In that same time period, Earth has seen hundreds of wars, thousands of battles, countless innovations in military technology. You're saying we've grown. Soft? Not soft, Grace corrected diplomatically. Specialized. Your technology is incredibly advanced, but it's all designed around energy-based systems. You've never encountered an opponent who chose a different path. Tharan leaned back in his chair. And your species chose kinetic weapons because ... Because they work, Grace said. Simply. Humans have a saying, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Kinetic weapons have been effective for thousands of years. We just found ways to make them faster and more accurate. Your ships, Tharan said slowly, they look so ... Crude compared to ours, Grace smiled. Form follows function in human design. We don't build ships to look beautiful. We build them to survive in combat and complete their missions. The Zephyrian leader was quiet for several minutes, clearly struggling with concepts that challenged everything he believed about technology and warfare. That can't be a human warship ... can it? He said finally, almost to himself. I'm sorry? Grace asked. Something one of my admirals said after your first battle. He couldn't believe that your small, ugly ships were actually warships. Now I understand why. Every human ship is a warship if you threaten what we protect, Grace said. Firmly. We don't build weapons to look impressive. We build them to work. Tharan nodded slowly. I begin to understand. Your entire species approaches warfare differently than we do. High Counselor, humanity doesn't want to fight the Zephyrian Empire. We just want to be left in peace to explore and develop. But if we're attacked, we will defend ourselves with everything we have. And what you have is apparently more than sufficient, Tharan said with what might have been humor. We prefer to think of it as adequate for our needs. Grace replied diplomatically. And negotiations continued for 3 days. In the end, they reached an agreement that surprised both sides with its simplicity. The Treaty of Mutual Non-Aggression established clear boundaries between human and Zephyrian space. Both species would respect each other's territory and engage in peaceful trade and cultural exchange. There is one thing I must know, Tharan said as they prepared to sign the final documents. Your weapons technology, how advanced is it really? Grace looked at Captain Clark, who nodded slightly. High Counselor, what we used against your fleets was our basic military equipment. We haven't even begun to show you what we can do when we really try. Tharan's eyes widened. You mean there are more powerful weapons? Human military research never stops, Grace said quietly. We've been working on some very interesting projects lately. Relativistic projectiles, swarm munitions, gravity-assisted kinetic bombardment systems. The Zephyrian leader held up a hand. I think I've heard enough. Perhaps it's best that our species remain friends. 6 months later, the first Zephyrian trade mission arrived at Earth. The alien diplomats were amazed by what they saw. Human cities bustled with activity. Factories churned out both military equipment and consumer goods. Space elevators carried cargo to orbital stations where new ships were being built. It's incredible, Ambassador Zolmar told his aide as they toured a human shipyard. They turned their entire civilization into a war machine in a matter of weeks, then converted it back to peaceful purposes just as quickly. A very adaptable species, his aide agreed, and a very dangerous one, if threatened, Zolmar added thoughtfully. Back on the Zephyrian homeworld, High Counselor Tharan stood in his private study, reading reports from across the galaxy. Word of humanity's military capabilities was spreading. Several smaller species that had been considering rebellion against Zephyrian rule were now quietly asking about establishing relations with Earth. The balance of power has shifted, he told his advisor. For the first time in 3 millennia, we are not the dominant military force in the galaxy. What do we do? Quothall asked. We adapt, Tharan replied. The humans have taught us something valuable, that survival requires constant innovation, not just technological superiority. Are you ordering military reforms? Yes, but not the kind you might expect. I want our military to start thinking like humans do. I want them to prepare for enemies who might use weapons.